Hola.
Good afternoon, Professor Bala. How are you? Welcome you back.
Good afternoon. How are you? How are you doing?
I cannot hear you. Fine, fine. And you? Hope everything's going well there. Where are you?
Yeah, we're back in Phoenix. The semester is about to start. So back to teaching. So
Okay. So let's wait maybe a few minutes
I'm sorry?
because it's one to more for more people to be connected, okay?
Okay.
Good. Buenas tardes a todos. Mientras tanto, les quería, mientras que antes que comencemos la clase, para esperar que algunos otros compañeros se conecten, acuérdense si no pueden ver la traducción instantánea mientras el profesor va dando su clase. Y también ahí los invitamos a que participen en el curso o a medida que va dando la clase, o también estar nosotros ahí en el momento.
Yo creo que perdemos la conexión de Xiomara, ¿estás ahí? Hola, Xiomara, ¿me escuchas?
Marcos, ¿me
Sí,
escuchas?
es que se te
Sí,
pierde,
sigue,
se te
sigue.
pierde la conexión a momentos. Se te pierde la conexión. Sí, yo lo que quería comentar
¿Va?
es
Ah,
que
ya, yo lo he escuchado bien.
sí, no, se te corta y luego vuelve, se te corta y luego vuelve. No sé si solo soy yo, no lo sé. No sé si está.
Sí, se estaba. Hola, buenas
Ya.
tardes.
Hola,
Sí,
hola.
estaba escuchándose cortado, Xiomara.
Sí, te quería hacer una pregunta, Yanima. Con solo el ID, los alumnos pueden ingresar, ¿no? Solo con el ID
Sí,
de la llamada, porque yo
entran a Zoom.
solamente
Sí, entran
compartí
a
el
Zoom y
ID.
colocan el ID, ¿correcto?
Perfecto,
Deberían.
Marco, envié hace un rato el link también.
el link, que no lo había visto, lo siento. Lo miro ahora mismo.
Oye,
Pero
mi
yo creo que
internet está así con humor cambiante. Hoy se siente bipolar, así que tengo la cámara apagada por eso.
Dale, ¿a mí se me escucha ahora o no? ¿Se corta aún?
Sí, sí, se escucha bien por ahora.
Ah, ok. Professor Bala, do you want to project something? Are you able to share
Yeah, I
or
can
we need
share.
to?
Yeah. Give me one
Okay.
second. Well, no, you'll have to turn on the
Now
sharing.
maybe,
Right now it's disabled.
hay que activar
now you
para que
can do
pueda.
it. I think so. Yes, I already did it. Could you please check
Yeah.
it if you can do it now?
Yeah. Can you see it?
Perfectly.
Okay.
Good.
Just let me know when I can start.
Ya.
I think, Marco, we can start, right?
Como tú digas, no sé, como tú digas, sí, comienzo yo, ¿sí?
Yeah.
Bueno, well, Professor Bala, first of all, I will take this opportunity to say hello once again. It has been a while without seeing each other,
Yeah.
so
It's been a while.
it's always nice to see you and see that you're back in Phoenix
Yeah.
teaching, which is something that we love. So good for that. I'm gonna introduce you and then we can start with the class, okay? So
Okay.
this is what
Sounds
I'm
good.
gonna do right away.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos. Damos comienzo a una sesión de gestión de la transformación digital. Esta vez nuevamente nos acompaña el profesor Bala. Les comento que tienen que confirmar el idioma hablado y también activar la traducción para aquellos que no lo hayan hecho. Esto es fundamental para que puedan recibir también en tiempo real la traducción de lo que está o lo que va a comentar el profesor Bala en su clase. Si bien el profesor Bala va a explicar los distintos conceptos, no tengan temor o no tengan ningún miedo en compartir algunas dudas, algunas consultas. Es más, nosotros lo que hacemos es incentivar que ustedes puedan transmitir cualquier duda o consulta que tengan. Recuerden que tienen aquí un experto de primer nivel internacional, por lo tanto, esta es la oportunidad para poder hacerlo. Tomando en consideración que esta es nuestra última sesión con él, yo les recomendaría que si tienen cualquier duda o consulta lo hagan o lo dejen también plasmado en el chat. Alguien si lo puede decir directamente, transmitir la consulta que lo haga, si no, la escribe en el chat o nos lo comenta, me lo comenta a mí y yo puedo transmitir la consulta. El profesor Bala normalmente da unos espacios para escuchar cualquier duda o consulta que pueda existir. Así que vamos a dar comienzo a la clase del profesor Bala. Profesor Bala, thank you very much. We welcome you with pleasure as usual. Thank you for being here, and the classroom is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Marco. It's always a pleasure. So, good afternoon, everyone. It has been a while, so hope you had a good time since the last time we spoke. So, the last three lectures, we talked about, business models, we talked about value chain, we talked about innovation and what are some of the models of innovation. It's not just about product, but different types. And those are all what I think of as building blocks for what we are essentially going to talk about today, which is the digital transformation at large, right? So if the course is all about digital transformation today, after we've talked about the different components of it, the building blocks of it, we're going to talk about what do we mean by digital transformation, how should a company go about on this journey of digital transformation, some of the maturity models in terms of where they are today, where do they want to go, and how do they want to go. We'll talk about that. And then we'll talk a little bit, if time permits, I want to briefly talk about change management as well, because as you all know, in this digital transformation journey, one of the things that an organization does is to essentially change itself. And then how do we make sure that everyone who is employed in that organization is on board with the different changes, because that change is hard, right? Change is hard for a lot of individuals. So we want to make sure that they're all on board as an organization goes through this journey. So we'll talk a little bit about change management, how you can carefully manage that, and what are some of the frameworks that you can use to manage that as well. So that's essentially what we're going to be covering in today's class. So let's sort of just get going with the definition of digital transformation. Right? What do we mean when we talk about digital transformation? What we are essentially talking about is not just adoption of some technology, but what we are thinking about is a reimagining of business models, right? Clearly, digital technologies play a huge role, but we are successful companies that go through this tend to look at their business models and reimagine them as well. So that's a key aspect of it. And it tends to be more than a technology adoption, right? It's a holistic organizational change. And typically what you see in a transformation is that you tend to have the intersection of all the major components: strategy, technology, customer experience, the culture of the organization, and so on, right? And so that's essentially what we mean when we talk about digital transformation, or for that matter, any transformation, organizational transformation tends to have an intersection of strategy, customer experience, and culture. Technology, of course, is a big role in digital transformation, right? Why do we care? Well, now more so than ever, we know that we are in what we can sometimes talk about digital first economy, right? If everyone today automatically tends to look at perhaps your computer to shop rather than go to a store first, right? That's just a very simple, trivial example. If you think about what is happening in the world with AI technologies and how those are sort of disrupting different industries, oftentimes now maybe you're not actually heading towards a search on Google, but perhaps you're going to ChatGPT or Gemini or any one of those AI bots first, and those have profound influence on individuals as well as organizations, right? So companies that are not keeping pace with these types of technologies tend to sort of wither and not survive, right? And so it is critical, in order for an organization to survive, that they have to pay attention to the digital first economies, and they have to pay attention to all the different technologies that are disrupting and need to think about how their organization can not only react to this, but also leverage these technologies and thrive and reimagine their organization as well as their customers, right? So what typically happens when these technologies disrupt industries is that the customer expectation changes drastically, right? So if you think about it, if you as an individual is used to a certain technology, whether it's shopping on the internet, whether it is using AI, or whether it is, using blockchain or whatever the case is, when you are using it and you're actually shopping with some of your, the companies that you do business with, you naturally extend that experience that you had at the individual level and want that same and similar experience when that organization is interacting with you, right? So what tends to happen is that the old way that you perhaps a good example could be a bank, the bank that you're banking with, right? And if you're doing everything on the computer, you expect that the bank, if you want a loan, that you could do all that online. You expect that the bank already has all your information so that you don't have to go and enter it again, right? You expect the bank to uh, guide you along with perhaps some AI bot to make your experience a little better, because that's what you've been doing in other areas in your organization, in your life. So that changing customer expectation often is um, a good indicator to see that organization need to change as well, right? If your expectations are changing and your bank is not changing in sync with that, chances are you're going to say, you know what, this bank is not that helpful, right? I don't have a mobile app that I can do everything in, and so on and so forth. And you then you will start looking at alternatives, right? So customer expectation changes are critical, and all organizations, whether they are banks, whether they are retail, whether they are B2B type of organizations, they all really need to keep a pulse on whether the expectations of customers are changing. And if they are, they need to look at it, right? And why does that change? Because of technology disruptions, right? That's essentially what tends to happen. And not only that, and you perhaps may also have economic shifts globally, right? Used to be 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, globalization was a big word, right? So I could, there were various cases done where, for example, one of the more famous cases is that if you go through a drive-in in McDonald's, the order actually was not being taken here, but centrally in a different state, and then executed and moved back. But that's just on the state level, but it could happen at the different company level. That's what the globalization was happening, right? But if you notice now from a political perspective, there is a tendency now for that globalization to sort of shift a little inward to doing it within the country. There's a protectionism that is happening. There is tariffs that are being imposed in various different countries, and that has an impact on it. And that will also have an impact on on your organization. If you're relying heavily for suppliers in China, you may not be able to afford anymore because of the tariffs and so on. So you need to be nimble about it, and you need to transform your organization, right? So all that tends to be external factors that affect organizations, and the more you can successfully transform these and leverage these forces, the better off you are in an organization. So that's why any type of transformation is key for the survival of organizations, right? So what is one of the things we want to look at in the digital transformation is typically any transformation for that matter. You want a roadmap, right? You want to have a handle on where you're going, right? So if I can sort of, there's a very famous book called Alice in Wonderland. And if I can paraphrase a saying in that, which is that if you don't know where you're going, all roads will lead you there, right? So in other words, if you don't know what your destination is going to be, you will constantly do anything and everything, because everything may eventually get there, or you will never get to the destination. So whereas what you really want in a transformation is a good roadmap to get you from point A to point B. And so it is good to have a roadmap, and the good news is you don't have to do it from scratch. There were two scientists, Shalmo and Williams, who came up with a roadmap for digital transformation, and this is what you see here. It's fairly straightforward. You basically want to know what your current reality is as far as digital is concerned, right? So you want to make sure you understand, have a clear idea of your existing business models, your value chains and actions. You have a good understanding of what is it that the customers are expecting, the new expectations, not the old ones, but the new expectation, right? And so given all that, that's your sort of your reality. That's the world you're playing in today. So now the next question is, where do you want to go? What is your ambition as far as digital is concerned, right? What are your objectives? What are your goals? And this is where you want to say that I want to make sure that I'm able to do A, B, and C for my customers, and I have the capability to do so, right? And then that's your goal. And you want to make sure that, you can't perhaps do everything. So you will prioritize your objectives. That's essentially what happens in terms of the digital ambition. Then you move on to what we typically call as a potential. What are the best practices? What are others doing? How are they doing it successfully in terms of what the digital transformation ought to be? What should be our design? What should be our platform look like? And what are some of the enablers? What are some technologies we need to do? What are some of the capabilities we need to get to, right, and get better at? So if I'm going to use a lot of machine learning and generative AI, I better make sure that I have those enablers while I'm trying to leverage that in my digital transformation journey, right? Then we get into the fit. So in other words, what is a good fit between the customer requirements and your platform and your objectives? And that's essentially what that fit would be. And finally, you get into the implementation, right? You will figure out what your business model, the new business model is going to be, what the what the customer experience is going to look like, and so on, right? And if your business model changes, perhaps your value chain will change, and so on, right? All those associated things. And that's essentially a roadmap. You can use this roadmap to check and sort of navigate your transformation journey, right? So that's essentially, and there are quite a few of them. This is just one of them. The other fairly well-known transformation roadmap is the McKinsey's one, right? Where you have 3 stages, and the first stage is all about defining value. Remember that you may have had a value that you may have defined and have perhaps been operating for 20, 30 years or more, but given the digital imperatives and given the things that may have affected, you want to come up with what the new value may look like. And once you define what that is, you have to get some buy-in from senior management, right? And then you will set clear targets, and you will get funding in order for you to do that, right? And then what you do is you start with what is often termed as a lighthouse project. You want to make something that is an important project, but at the same time, perhaps it's not the complete transformation. You want to get some quick wins. And so you want to make sure you have that. You identify a project. You want to make sure it's staffed with really good talent, because you want people who are willing to innovate. Remember the building blocks I talked about. You want people who are willing to innovate. You want people who have the capabilities as far as the technologies are concerned. You want to make sure you're doing it in a very agile, nimble fashion, very quickly. And if you have to fail, you'll fail fast, and so on. And you want to nurture a culture of that. Once you do that, and this lighthouse project is successful, you move on to the third stage, which is scaling up, right? How do I now take that and run it across the entire organization and quickly build the capabilities I need, and how do I adopt this new operating model. So that's essentially what a roadmap may look like. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions or comments before I move on to the next step.
Muy bien, hacemos aquí entonces la primera pausa. El profesor quiere saber si es que alguien tiene alguna duda, alguna consulta hasta este punto, o si se entiende perfectamente, vamos bien y seguimos avanzando. Así que lo que ustedes digan, si alguien tiene alguna duda, alguna consulta, la puede formular en el chat. Si alguien se siente con la capacidad de poder formularla directamente, también lo puede hacer, como quiera. ¿No? Muy bien, en honor al tiempo vamos a seguir entonces, vamos a continuar. Professor, seems like everything is crystal clear, so you can continue with the class. Thank you.
All right, and my pace is good? Not going too fast?
No, perfect. Everything goes perfectly.
Okay.
Don't worry.
All right, so now we'll get on to the different types of frameworks we're going to talk about. First, we'll talk a little bit about the planning side of it, and then we'll talk about the implementation side of it, right? On the planning front, we have a number of different frameworks that we'll be talking about so that you'll have an idea. There's a lot of commonality amongst all of that, and I want to make sure you capture the sort of the common things across it. And then you may want to take that framework and customize it a little bit depending on the needs of the organization, right? But planning, obviously, in everything, and more so in digital transformation, is a key step, right? In terms of where you want to go and how you want to go about it. What are the different dimensions that you want this transformation to take place in? And then obviously you want to have a good understanding of what are your weaknesses, what are your strengths, and if I need to improve in certain areas during my digital journey, how do I go about getting it, right? And then what it typically does is it provides a baseline by which you can compare how well you're progressing, right? And how well your transformation journey is taking place. And so one of the things you can do is leverage the number of different maturity assessment tools that are out there, and you can sort of use them to assess where you're going. And the nice thing about all these tools are the different dimensions or the areas that they focus on. One of the more popular one is this thing called the TM Forum. Actually, a number of different companies got together and said, let's put together an assessment model for digital maturity so that we can all leverage that as we move forward in our journey. And so the thing that they did is, at a very high level, they said we've got 6 dimensions that we want to think about, right? We want to think about 6 dimensions, and how well we do in each of these is what we want to understand. So the key ones are on the customer is one dimension. So you want to think about how are we engaging our customers? What does our customer experience look like? How well do we know and have a good handle on insights as far as customers are concerned, their behavior is concerned? Do we have the data for that? Do we use that data to do some analytics? Are we really having a good handle on it? And how good is the customer? Do they treat you as their partner in this digital journey? Do they trust you? And so on and so forth, right? And then you get into the strategy side, right? So once I have a good handle on my customer, how good do I have it on the strategic side, right? Remember that, digital transformation is not just a technology thing, it's a business model transformation. So all that kind of falls under the strategy side, right? How good is our business model? Do we need to change it? Do we have to change our value chain, and so on and so forth, right? And how good is our brand, and how good is our market intelligence? Do we have a good handle on what is it that the market is telling us? Do we have a good handle on what is our competitor doing, and so on? The typical things that come under strategic management, right? What is your competitive advantage? What's your value? And so on and so forth has to be part of that as well, right? And of course, technology, right? What are some of the emerging technologies that are affecting us in our industry? How is AI, for example? Everybody's talking about AI. We can start there today in terms of an example. How is AI affecting us? How is Gen AI affecting us? So, for example, if I'm in the education industry, for example, how is this AI going to impact our business? If I'm running a university, and I have programs on, let's say, analytics and intelligence and so on, will those things change? Will the demand for those programs be the same? Will they be different? How does AI impact that? All those kind of things I need to understand in technology, what the impact is going to be. How good is our capabilities in technology, right? Do we really understand? Do we have people who understand AI? Do we, do we have people who understand privacy and infrastructure and security that we need to do perhaps with all these things? How will we do that? And do we have the capabilities of that? That comes under technology. Then we get into operations. Everything that we do on a day-to-day basis, how is that going to change with the technology, with the disruptions and so on? Do we do things fast, or are we doing things in a very conventional system where it takes us 3 months to get some requirements, 6 months to develop something, another month or two to deploy it? You're looking at almost a year. And in the current world of AI and so on, 1 year could be a lifetime. Do we do things a lot faster than that? Operationally, how are we, right? And so that's a dimension that you want to rate yourself. And culture, right, which is critical. Do we collaborate well? Do we really have leadership that is, leading us from the front and is willing to take on and deal with failures? Because there are maybe some challenges. So you may run into problems, and hopefully you have a leadership and culture that is able to withstand those types of things and not panic and move on. Do we have a good governance? How will we know whether whatever we are doing is ethically okay, or are there biases in there? So you need a strong governance as well, right? And are the employees on board, and are they following us, and are they willing to go through this, or is there some hesitation? And then finally, data, right? In terms of everything we do today, it tends to be data based, and data using data rather than just intuition. So do we have a culture of using data and making decisions, or are we still basing it on somebody said, my boss said I need to do this, so I'm going to be doing it, even if you kind of think that that's perhaps not right? So those are the 6 dimensions. And what you want to do is, in the planning stage, you want to evaluate yourself and take a good look at where you are. Because if you're not very good with data, if you're not very good with technology, then that should raise a flag, right? That should be saying, hey, I need to shore up on these 2 areas before I can move too far in this journey that I'm doing, right? So that is just one thing. There are a few other frameworks. I'll just go through them quickly, but you will start seeing that there is a pattern to these things. So for example, this is the Deloitte maturity model, and it looks very similar to what you saw in the other one. It doesn't quite call out data, but some of these, it combines it. You've got customer strategy, technology, operations, and it's got a sort of a split thing for culture as organization and culture, right? So similar things, so similar concept. So you can use this or the other one, doesn't matter which one you use, or you can even customize these. So that'll give you an idea, right? So this one is simpler. This one is Google and Boston Consulting together came up with a model where you really have 4 steps, right? And different phases, if you will. The first is, it's comparing to a baby, perhaps, is the nascent stage, which is often is the crawling stage, right? A baby starts crawling. And here what tends to happen is that we have we really don't use data very much. Decisions are made sometimes in silos. We are not as collaborative and looking at things holistically. And it is more departmental driven, tends to be more departmental driven. Then you move on from there to the emerging. So this is when baby starts from crawling is now into the walking stage. Now you've got some collaboration, some leveraging of data, you've got some technologies that you are getting better at, and you move on to the emerging side, your efficiency and effectiveness are increasing. And then you move on to connected states. Think of this as the running stage, right? Where now there's a culture of using data, how you collect data, looking at insights and all that from that data, collaborating, really understanding where the business is, where the market is headed, where the business is headed, and so on, to finally the flying stage or the multi-moment where you are at the top of where in terms of the rest of the organizations and how well you are using digital technologies and how well you've done your business models and this is typically when you are one of the more successful organizations in that digital transformation. So this is yet another way to look at a model. And then we'll talk about one more, which is this is from MIT. And basically here we are talking about a 2x2, right? That's a very popular consulting paradigm, where on one side you've got the intensity of the transformation management, how well you're doing it, and on the other side is the digital intensity, right? So on the beginning side, your transformation intensity is low, your digital intensity is low as well. These are typically the beginners, and you are sort of playing around a little bit, you're experimenting a little bit, but you really don't have a digital culture. So kind of similar to the nascent of the previous maturity framework that's out there, right? And then if I move up the digital chain, you are still, now your intensity of digital is a lot higher. So you may be chasing flashy stuff, you may say, hey, I need to do something very flashy. Everybody's doing something in AI. I need to do something in AI. But it is really not very well thought out, right? It tends to be perhaps the marketing department is doing something, or perhaps the IT department is doing something, but it is really not aligned very well to the overarching strategy of the organization, and the coordination is not very well. So it's sort of, it may look pretty attractive, but in effect, it is really not that effective from a transformation perspective, right? So if I sort of then move on to the lower right-hand side, this is typically my transformation intensity is very high, reasonably high, in the sense I understand where I need to go, right? So I have a vision, I know that I need to do certain things, but my my digital side of things is still low. I may have put these things in place. I may have governance. I may have thought about the ethical side of using some of these technologies. I may have thought about, biases and the risks associated with all that. But I'm really not doing a lot. I'm putting perhaps the groundwork in place, right? And then finally, you've got the top right, which is where you really want to get to, is the digeratis, or the digital literaties, if you will, right? Where you've got a strong vision, you've got good governance, you've got a lot of initiatives that are aligned and are generating business values, if you will, and where your culture is a strong digital culture, right? And so that's essentially what the maturity model is, and you can sort of think about it in that sense, right? So now that we have an assessment model, the next step is I need something from a transformation perspective, right? How do I go about transforming my organization? Before I move on, let me just pause, find out if there are any questions or comments.
Muy bien, el profesor entonces establece una segunda pausa para saber si alguien tiene alguna duda o alguna consulta. Tenemos ahí dudas o consultas, perfecto. La idea es que si tienen alguna duda sobre los modelos de madurez digital que ha presentado, que son muy útiles y que seguramente han visto en clases, lo que quieran comentar, lo pueden comentar. Si no lo quieren comentar directamente, lo pueden hacer a través del chat también y vamos a hacer llegar esos comentarios al profesor. Herman, ¿lo vas a hacer directamente? ¿Le preguntas directamente?
Sí, lo voy a intentar en inglés.
Ningún problema.
Hi, teacher.
Hello.
My name is Herman.
Hi.
When reading some text, I found that there is more than one method to measure the maturity of digital transformation in una organización.
Yes, there
Such
are
as
different models. Yeah.
such as MME and several others. And you mentioned another one. Is there any special recommendation for knowing which one to choose?
I think that really depends on the circumstances and what you're comfortable with. So, for example, you have a lot of, so let's take these four models that we are talking about, right? This one is reasonably comprehensive, right? It tells you 6 dimensions, and each one has 6 or 7 of them. If you have the time to go through each one, then that might be appropriate, or the Deloitte or this might be appropriate for you. If you're willing to do a comprehensive analysis, right? If you're just trying to figure out where I am and you want to do that fairly quickly, then the Google or the MIT one might be more appropriate, right? So, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you only have to do one of them. You can use this in combination. I may use the Google BCG one or the MIT one at a very high level first, and then I may drill down and I say, okay, I'm in the beginner stage, and by the way, when I sort of try to look at it, I'm not doing too well in customer strategy and culture. Let's say I'm just making it up, right? I have a tendency to think that these are the areas I need to look at. Then I may want to drill down a little bit deeper into that by using this particular framework. So it's not that you have only one to do. You can combine them if you want, and really it's up to you to figure out which one is appropriate for you, right? The reason I'm talking about these frameworks is that these are guidelines, so that an organization doesn't have to start from scratch. An organization can leverage these types of frameworks that are already in place, but you may want to do a combination of it in order for you to get there, right? So I would like you to think about it more in terms of guidelines and which might be more appropriate, rather than saying one is better than the other, right? There are advantages and disadvantages. Some may take more time, some may take less time, some may be more comprehensive, and something may not be as comprehensive, but you really want to use your judgment to figure out which one is appropriate at that given point in time. Does that help?
Perfect, teacher. Gracias. Thank you.
Okay.
Muchas gracias, Herman, por la consulta. Tenemos otra pregunta también formulada por el chat. Pablo Castillo. Professor Bala, Pablo Castillo asked the following question. The models seen so far are mostly for the service industry. Are there any models for the productive, from the production side, under the concept of Industry 4.0?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that I wouldn't call this really only service industry, right? I mean, if you think about it and break down each of these, there are elements of this that may apply to manufacturing or industry organization. So for example, if I think about customer or strategy, obviously they're applicable to those industries as well. Now, if you feel that you want to get a little deeper into one of them, let's take operations, or let's take strategy, I would go down that. Or if you say, listen, supply chain is an important component of my value proposition, and so what I would do is and if you think that is more important to you for your organization, I may just introduce that as another dimension because I can potentially do that under culture, strategy, and operation, but I can explore that and keep it separate, right? If I really want to. So I don't think I would look at this as a service only, but I would look at it across. But you may want to tweak some of this and make it a little bit more detailed in some areas if you think that it doesn't apply that well to my organization. But otherwise, there is really no constraint really of doing that. But great question.
Thank you very much. Si alguien tiene alguna otra duda, alguna consulta. No, perfecto. Professor, thank you very much. We can continue.
Okay. All right. So now let's move on to, once you've sort of done the maturity side of it, let's now look at how do you go about with the transformation? How do you plan that actual digital transformation, which is the key thing that, that folks want to look at, right? So basically, if you think about this, you want a structured methodology in order for you to adapt your existing business model if you have to, or come up with new business models, right, in response to digital disruption. And so, for example, if you think about, remember the business model discussions we talked about, I think we briefly alluded to this one. So I may have only sold, my business model might have been that I'm selling a particular part, and all I'm really doing is selling that part, and perhaps I don't even get recurring revenue because the maintenance of that typically is done by my partners and so on. And given the sort of the digital impact, I may now need to come up with a subscription model. So I may need to change my business model completely. I think I briefly talked about Professor Marco and his research where, you have basically now service-oriented organization, even though they're manufacturing, like Rolls-Royce doesn't sell its engine anymore, it sells it as a subscription to its engine, right? And so things of that, those are actual business model transformations, if you will. You're really coming up with new business models. So if you do that, right, you really want to make sure that you are approaching it in a thoughtful manner, in a structured manner. And so there are a few approaches. Once again, just like the previous frameworks, there are similarities associated with these approaches. You can sort of take one and modify it if you want to, and customize it for a particular organization if that helps. But in general, I want you to sort of focus on the concepts behind that and not necessarily the actual framework, right? So for example, in SR's approach is you start with analysis. And in this analysis, what am I doing? I'm analyzing my customers, I'm analyzing my market, I'm analyzing my competition. I'm getting a sense of what is it that I need to do. And I need to get a sense of what my existing business model is. Are there any deficiencies associated with that? Are they getting disrupted because of what's happening with all the different technologies? And if I have to evolve with it, right? So in order for me to evolve with that, I need to understand what's my competition doing. What's the market size? If I do change my business model, is the market segment going to get bigger? It's going to get smaller. How do I do that? And so on and so forth. So that happens in my analysis stage. That's essentially the input. Then I have to come into the strategy phase. So now how do I change? What are some of the things I need to worry about if I have to change? What will my P&L look like if I go down this path? It may take a hit in the first few years, right? Remember that if I am moving from a traditional, I'm selling something, and I may sell something that may sell for $3 million. If I'm running a subscription business, I will not be able to charge $3 million in a year, right? So I'm going to take some near-term hit to my revenue and so to my P&L, but I may have a longer-term benefit that may go over the next 5-10 years or so, because I may have only got 3 million, but if I get that 3 million over 4 years, everything else is now I will continue to get, what is 3 million divided by 4? 750,000. If I'm getting 750,000 every year, after 4 years, I get into break even, right? I've got the 3 million. But after that, I'm continuing to get 750,000. So that is going to be all running towards my bottom line, right? So how does that affect our P&L and so on and so forth? So I need to think about all that in that strategy phase, if you will. Then I get into the design part of it, right? What is it that the platform is going to look like? So if I'm going to convert now into a subscription business from a traditional business, I now need to make sure that the customers can interact with me because on an ongoing basis. In the traditional side of selling it once, I'm done. Whereas if I'm in the digital side of things, I have to constantly interact with that customer on an ongoing basis. So I need a platform. I need something that if I didn't have one, I need a platform to engage with them. If I was in what I think of as an agent model, right? So in other words, I never sold directly to my customers. I usually did it through an agency model. That may change now. That may have a disruption. So how do I sort of manage that? All that will go into the design of it, right? How does my organization look like post this? I may have an impact. I may have certain roles that I may not need anymore. I may need new roles, right, in order for me to manage that, because I may not have had a customer service department that was very busy in the days of just once and done, transactional business, so to speak. Whereas now I need to make sure that I have a fantastic customer service side. So how does that all change? And then finally, I get into the transformation, right? So this is once again a model or an approach or a framework that gives you guideline of these are some of the things you need to think about, right? That is Esser's approach. Pricewaterhouse had a slightly different. It doesn't call out analysis as a separate step, but it's part of the strategy. It calls for construction as a separate phase, and it also has something called the review, which is a good thing. Which is you sort of now at the end of your initial journey, you want to evaluate what went right, what didn't go right, and so on and so forth. So there's this separate review side of it. The Bowie and Shable, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, those is fairly more compressed, right? You want to analyze the different influences of digital technologies that are out there, how they may shape your business model. You want to compare where you're currently and where you want to go, and then you develop an implementation model, right? So that's yet another one. And so once you have this planning side, we get into the actual framework for digital transformation. And this one is an interesting one. This was by a called Christian Matt. And the idea here is that there are really 4 major pillars, if you will, on your transformation when you're actually implementing it. At the center of it is the financial aspect of it, right? Because this is going to be an expensive proposition, right? Transformations are never cheap. They're never inexpensive. There's a lot of disruption. There's a lot of impact within the organization and outside of it. But you want to make sure that from a financial perspective, that it's worth doing. And typically it is. Otherwise, you will run out of your business, right? And you may not be able to survive. But nevertheless, you want to make sure that you are thoughtful about it, and that if you're doing changes to your business model, that you are actually going to come out ahead by the time you're done. So the financial aspect, how much capital do I need? Is this going to be a lot more expensive than what we had originally thought about? And then, of course, technologies are a very key part of all this, right? So how do I use those technologies? How do I sort of leverage them? And what are the changes that I need to have? I may have structural changes, which is really organizational side of things. How do I need to do that? Like I gave you that example about customer service, if you will. I may have to pay much more attention in that. That may change my organization. And there are changes in value creation, because remember that you always want to go back to the basics. The basics is that an organization provides value, creates and provides value. And so in this journey, if that proposition changes, that's fine. You want to do it, right? What are those changes? Are we still giving that? Hopefully our value increases as we go through this journey, right? Our value to our customers increases as we go through this journey. So this is yet another way to sort of guide you around what are the things that are important steps in it, right? And then of course you've got a lot more comprehensive frameworks, and I think someone asked the question about Industry 4.0, but here's your sort of look at it at the heart of it. You are looking at digitization and integration of value chains, the vertical value chains and the horizontal value chains. We talked a little bit about it, I think, in week 2. And then you get into the products and services that you're offering, right? The digitization of that. And then finally, at the heart of it, at the core of it, is your business models as well, right? And how the customer experience changes. So that's the core thing that you're talking about. And in order for you to do that, you have to develop a capability around data and analytics as well, your core capability. I would add, your knowledge of AI as part of that, as well as some of your core. And then, of course, you've got all the different tools and technologies that are out there. It may be using location technologies, it may be about IoT, it may be about 3D printing, and so on and so forth. And so, you want to take whatever is relevant, and if there is something that is missing for your organization, you may want to put it at that, right? That is yet another way of doing it. There are a couple of more that I will talk about. This is from Cognizant, the consulting company that has had quite a successful stint as a services consulting organization. And they are very similar, right? You have the customer, the product or services, and the processes and systems and the organization at the middle. And then, of course, you've got various different things, right? You have to digitize the customer experience. So in order for you to do that, you have to look at omni-channel, digital marketing, connected products, and insights, and essentially that I may be doing something on the phone, and suddenly I may get on the web, and I should be able to have those things talk to each other, right, and do it well. Or I may have it at the organizational side. It is all about digital collaboration, innovation, the development of digital skills and capabilities. My partner ecosystem, I think, to the question that, most of these seem to be internally focused or services oriented. No, you also have to think about your ecosystem, your partner ecosystem, right? And finally, how you digitize your products. That's where sometimes you may come up with different business models. So I may say that I can now come up with different models where I may have had a subscription model, but now I may also have a pay-per-use model, right? So you think about the publishing companies, the newspaper organizations, right? So they had to change their model from, newspaper subscription to digital subscription. And now they are into, if you like an article, they say, can you just pay for this article, right? Behind the paywall, or you can get into a subscription. So there are different things that you have to do. And obviously your operations need to align with all the different things that we are talking about here, right? So that is yet another framework. And then, of course, Gartner, everybody has a framework. I just will quickly run through this. Gartner thinks that there are 6 steps to a successful one, right? Make sure that the organization has a very shared understanding. That's the first step. The second step is make sure the right leaders are in place, right? Because if there's really no point in putting someone who is not a digitally savvy individual as your digital transformation, right? So that's why you now see titles like Chief Digital Officer. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that title did not exist. Why? because now organizations feel that it's a critical component, and you need someone who is savvy enough, who understands technology, who understands business, and can lead that charge, right? And then you get into centers of excellence and so on and so forth. And then I think I have one more, which is the McKinsey's framework, and it's fairly, it's called the 4Ds. You discover, right? You start with discover. That's your digital ambition, what your strategy ought to be based on the different things. Then you design, right? You reinvent and you prototype certain things. Then clearly you also want to, once you deliver, you also want to de-risk, right? So that make sure that you do not expose yourself to financial and operational risk. So, and then in the last, you've got the MIT side of things, and it's very similar to the rest of the things we are talking about. But here, what we are really talking about is an operational backbone, shared customer insights. You've got a platform, right? And then you are leveraging that platform. So the key takeaways really are that there are a number of these available, right? And so you want to make sure you are not, if you want to see what works for you, right? What is your industry context? What is the need? Because some of these frameworks may be better suited for certain types of industry. And so you want to make sure you understand that. Now, at the end of the day, these are just tools. They don't guarantee the success, right? Just because I'm using a framework doesn't automatically mean that I'm going to be successful in my digital transformation. You still need the key things: effective leadership. You still need a culture of innovation. You still need a culture where you're willing to say that certain things will fail. You still want to make sure that you're customer centric, right? That at the end of the day, you have the customer front and center throughout your journey, so that you don't lose sight of the fact that it is the customers for whom you're creating that value, right? So you still need these things, even though you may have a framework. Doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't do these things well, chances are you're going to fail, right? And remember that it is a continuous journey, right? It is not an end, because newer technologies will come along, newer disruptions will take place, and you will continue to evolve and transform. And so it's not that you have reached an end, it's going to be an ongoing journey, right? And remember that technology is not the only solution. It's an enabler. It's part of the solution, but it is not the total solution, right? You want to think about all the different aspects we had talked about. A holistic approach is what is needed. Okay, so now, before we get into change management, let's pause again and see if there were any questions in these frameworks that we talked about, or the approach we are talking about. So,
Professor Bala, in fact, we have a question from Orieta. She left it on the chat, but I'm going to read it for you. Are the characteristics of dimensions always qualitative? This question is based on the digital maturity models. If all the characteristics of the dimension are always qualitative, what will be your impression on that question?
So help me understand a little bit about when you say always qualitative. Give me an example, because these are dimensions, right? These are areas, but doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do quantitative analysis on these things. So I just want to make sure I understand the context behind that question, so that I'm not missing something.
I'm not quite sure about the context, so I'm going to ask her directly, okay?
Yeah.
Orieta, me gustaría por favor que clarificaras el contexto de la pregunta, por favor, para poder hacérsela correctamente. Entiendo que si son cualitativas las características de las dimensiones, pero ¿a qué te refieres concretamente? No sé si solamente soy yo o no se le escucha a Orieta. Orieta, lamentablemente no te
No,
escuchamos.
no se escucha. Mm.
No te escuchamos, se te escucha muy entrecortado.
¿Se escucha ahí, no?
Ahora sí
Ahí
perfectamente.
se escucha.
Te hemos perdido nuevamente, lamentablemente. Sí, bueno, voy a intentar. No sé si Orieta puedes intentarlo nuevamente, si no, creo que voy a intentar interpretar lo que creo que dijiste, pero si lo puedes decir tú mucho mejor.
If there is audio
I
issues,
think the orientation of the question is focuses on the all the different aspects that include the digital maturity model. If all of those aspects are only measured in a qualitative way and not in a
yeah,
quantitative
no,
way, are
not
those
necessarily.
are those in essence qualitative analysis or not necessarily?
Not
This is
necessarily, and I think that's a good clarification. So, for example, if I'm doing something on the customer side of it, right? So let's say I want to look at what's happening with the customer, what their expectations are, and so on and so forth. I can do a quantitative analysis. There's nothing that stops me from saying it's all qualitative, where I'm just asking someone. I can look at the data, right? In fact, I would argue if you see one of the things in the model, there is one model that talks about data as a key dimension. And so when we talk about data as a key dimension, automatically what are we saying? We are saying that we are doing some quantitative analysis on that data, and it is not anecdotal evidence. It is the data telling me that I'm going to, that this is what is happening, right? So if the data tells me, for example, that I'm just making up an example here, right? So if the data tells me that there is a decline in customer retention, right, over a period of time, so what I now need to do is I now need to understand why is it that my retention is going down, right? So I now need to understand, and I'm now doing a quantitative analysis, right? I'm not doing qualitative. I may do both. I may do mixed mode analysis. So I may say, hey, why when I look at this data, I see that the customer hold time has gone up significantly in the last 6 months, and they seem to correlate towards the fact that the retention is going down while my customer hold is going up. So I may have a hypothesis that my customer service issues are causing the retention decline, right? That's my hypothesis. Now I have to now do an analysis to see whether my hypothesis is valid or not. So what I may do is I may take that data, I may run that analysis, and then I may decide that, depending on, if you're familiar with hypothesis testing, it'll depend on what my p-value is, and then I may reject the hypothesis, the null hypothesis, or not, right? So it is, every step of this includes analysis within that topic or dimension, within that area, that may be quantitative in nature, right? So I don't want you to think about this as though this is all qualitative, but every analysis, not every, each and every step, each and every dimension may include analysis that may be quantitative in nature, or it may be the case that I may not have the data, in which case I may start with some qualitative analysis. I may reach out to some customers and, say, tell me how you think about us as an organization. Where are we doing well? Where are we not doing well? And so on and so forth, right? So that might be yet another way to begin my analysis if I don't have any data, right? So it's a combination of that. Think of these maturity models as just areas or dimensions, areas of focus or dimensions that we need to pay attention to. But how I do analysis inside that area of focus or dimension could be qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, or any of those things. Hope that's clear.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Professor Bala. We have another question from Manuel Munoz. His question is there any suggested model for the armed forces, or if they have or if they implement their own models? I mean, as far as your knowledge, do you know any particular model for armed
That's
forces?
interesting. That is interesting. So I would say I wouldn't look at, maybe let me try to generalize it first. So I would say armed forces would be more like a public sector or a not-for-profit type of thing, right? And if I sort of make that assumption, and if that's acceptable, where I would then look at is I may look at the same areas, but they may all have different nuances to it, right? So, for example, if I talk about armed forces, and you say, okay, who are our customers? Then it might be a combination of, depending on where I am, it might be more about the country, and perhaps certain segments of the people, and so on, and so that might change. Where I think the biggest difference will be is in culture. In most armed forces, it typically is a command and control culture, right? If you think about why armed forces are successful, oftentimes is because of that command and control. I tell you what to do, you go do it, right? You don't question that. That's the culture of that side of it. Whereas typically all these guys talk about is collaboration and so on. So that part may differ a little bit. You may have to modify it, but think about armed forces. If I'm in armed forces and I think about the way, battles or wars are being fought now, there's a lot of digital aspect to it. There is cyber warfare. There are drones now that seem to pretty much do a lot of things if you think about wars and battles and so on and so forth. So they also have to evolve, right? There is no point in having traditional warfare approaches if the technology is moving on. So it's absolutely applicable, but I may change the model a little bit to suit that need, right? I may look at certain aspects and say, we need to customize this element or not, but that would be on a case-by-case basis. Hope that's a great question. Hope that helps.
Le preguntamos a Manuel. Manuel, no sé si tienes alguna pregunta más, si estás conforme con la respuesta del profesor. Manuel Muñoz, no sé si está Manuel Muñoz por ahí. Conforme, perfecto, muchísimas gracias. No sé si alguien tiene alguna otra duda, alguna otra consulta que formular. Vuelvo a repetir, aprovechemos esta instancia, ya que es la última sesión que tenemos con el profesor, por lo tanto, aprovechemos esta oportunidad para hacer preguntas o para clarificar dudas que tengamos sobre los modelos de transformación digital, sobre el contenido en general de las distintas sesiones. Es el momento para hacerlo, ¿no? Bueno, entiendo que todavía hay un contenido más y luego también habrá otro espacio para consultas, así que les animo para que también las puedan hacer después de este tiempo que el profesor comentará seguramente otro importante aspecto. Professor Bala, whenever you're ready. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Marco. So let's sort of move on to the final component, if you will, of this lecture, which is change management, right? What do we really mean when we talk about change management, and and what is it? Well, at the end of the day, remember that when organizations need to change and communicate, they need to make sure that they communicate those things fairly well with the rest of the organization, right? Because at the end of the day, leadership by themselves are not going to do this transformation. Everybody has to get involved. And so there's got to be a structured way to make sure that the organization is communicating what we are going to be changing, why we are going to be changing, what's the rationale behind it, and so on, right? So you want to make sure that there's a thoughtful way by which an organization is guiding people through that change, right? So that's essentially what we want to be doing when we talk about things like digital transformation. So why is it important? Well, one of the things that we find is that those that have an excellent change management tend to be more successful with their implementation than those that aren't, right? So for example, if you have poor change management and you have a good one, you're 7 times more likely. Now that's pretty high, but you know, it's, even if it is not accurate, even if it is not 7 times, you may still be 2 times. It's still fantastic, right? And one of the things that McKinsey's found was that effective change management can increase success rates of initiatives by 60%, right? And the key is because there is always resistance and in when you want to change something. So for example, if you're going into a digital transformation mode, probably those that were doing things in the conventional way may show some resistance, right? Because they may be worried about their jobs. They may be worried about different things. So effective change management often reduces this resistance and sort of fosters a culture about it, right? It obviously improves communication and collaboration among the different stakeholders, and more importantly, employees will buy in, and you have employee engagement for that, right? So anytime you think of something, so for example, you know, if you're an organization and you want to say, you know what, hey, this whole AI phenomena, specifically Gen AI, is completely changing the way we do things. If you don't communicate it, chances are people are going to start worrying. And what I always say in my experience as an executive is that if you don't communicate, people will make up their own stuff, right? So there's a vacuum of information, and so that vacuum needs to get filled. So if you don't fill it, somebody else is going to say something, and rumors are going to start, and very soon all that vacuum is taken up by poor communication and rumors rather than the communication that you want as an executive, right? So you want to be very clear about that, and you want to make sure that you have things. And you know, I'm sure some of you have faced this in your organization. It feels as though that change is constant. It constantly, something or the other seems to happen, and you're asked to change, and the floor, you know, seems to be constantly shifting, and you have what I call change fatigue. You're like, oh my goodness, we are being asked to change again. I thought we just did something. Why are you asking me to do it again, right? And so it tends to be taxing to employees. Employees feel as though they're constantly asked to do more with less, and so it is imperative that executives manage these types of initiatives, especially digital transformation initiatives, and do it well, right? And make sure people understand what is it that we are doing, and more importantly, why do we think we should be doing this, right? So what is a characteristic of a successful change? It is all about, you know, clearly identify, listen, here's a new technology. It has the potential to completely disrupt our industry. Let's talk about how it may change our processes, how we can improve it. Let's talk about how it's going to impact our market forces and customer expectations, and so on and so forth, right? So that's one part. And that's the most obvious part. But a good one also addresses people issues, right? So it is the acknowledgement that, yes, some of our roles may change. I may not clearly define what your new role looks like, but let's work together as we sort of get to that, right? You need employees that are willing and able to do stuff. So in order for in order for you to have those employees willing and able, you have to clearly articulate why that change is important, right? You have to give them the reason behind it. You have to say, listen, if we don't do this and the competitors do A, B, and C, we're going to be in trouble, right? So we want to be proactive about it, right? And you want to make sure you're recognizing those individuals who are willing to change, and you want to make sure you're rewarding them, and so that there is an incentive for people to sort of go in and say, yeah, I think I need to get on this bandwagon because it looks like, it's good for my own career as I move forward and so on, right? You want to make sure that you identify areas that they may need training on. So if your organization is perhaps not sophisticated enough in the use of machine learning and AI and other technologies, you can't expect them to be experts at it overnight. You want to make sure you're training them, right? And finally, recognizing that resistance to change is a natural thing, right? Because a lot of it is, I don't know what's going to happen to my job, right? So I'm nervous, and sometimes, hey, I used to do it this way. Now you're telling me I may not have that control in that, and so on, right? And so you want to make sure you're addressing all that, right? So if you do that, then you will have a relatively successful change management, right? And just like anything else, we're going to talk about frameworks again. This lecture is full of frameworks today, different types of frameworks. And so there are some change management frameworks that are out there that give you a very structured approach into how you can manage and implement and communicate change initiatives, right? And it can be pretty popular. And so we're going to touch base on 4 of them very quickly. And once again, there will be a lot of similarities around these frameworks. And what you really want to do is figure out which one might be appropriate for this particular initiative that you're thinking about. And so the first one is ADKAR, which is just an abbreviation. It stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement, right? So there are 5 key factors that influence change adoption of an individual, right? First and foremost, why should I change, right? Understanding the need for the change and the implications. That's your awareness, right? And then the desire is the personal motivation. Why, as I understand why the organization needs to change, I want to now say, what is in it for me, right? What is it in it for this role? And if I feel that, hey, this is where the industry is headed, and perhaps, whether I'm a marketing individual or a finance person or whatever, if I really get more familiar with how I can leverage AI, as an example, it might be good for my career, right? So let me get on that. That's my desire, right? And then, of course, it gets to the knowledge. How do I acquire these skills, right? How do I now need to look at it? And then the ability that I'm not confident in applying these new knowledge and skills. And finally, recognition, sort of the reinforcement is that you recognize people, you reward for their behavior, and so on. So that's your ADKAR framework. So what I would do is, if the organization is going down that line, I may tweak the message. So if I'm talking to a finance professional, I may say, here's what I think is going to happen to your industry in the next 5-10 years. Here's why I think it might be good for you to get more familiar with it. And so that's the desire part, right? So I may tailor my messages accordingly. So that's ADKAR, fairly common, but not necessarily as sophisticated as KOTOR. I would say KOTOR is probably the standard that a framework that a lot of companies use, right? So you've got like basically 8 things in that. You start with creating a sense of urgency. Why now? Why do I have to change? Why, as an organization, do we have to change? And why does it have to be now, right? So you want to clearly articulate why that needs to take place, right? Then you build a coalition. And the way you build a coalition is you pick different people who are, who are willing to change and so on. and you want them as your evangelists, for lack of a better phrase, right? And then you put together a strategic vision, which is like a combined vision of this is where we are headed. And then you enlist some volunteers. You've got those guys, now go and say, get more people for me, right? And as a leader, your job is to remove barriers. So enable this transformation to take place by removing these barriers. Be very clear about short-term wins, because those things motivate people and energize people, right? And so make sure there are short-term wins, and then you can sustain that acceleration, and then the change becomes sort of institutionalized, right? So those are your key things, steps in that. And what they also talk about is this, what they think of as 4 core principles. And they are what they often refer to as the power of plus. So it's not just one thing, it's a combination. So it's not just about management, but it's also about leadership. It's about you, the executives, saying clearly and being leaders in the forefront and showing behavior. And if something doesn't work, it's okay, and we move on. We don't penalize the teams that didn't quite make it successful and so on, because sometimes technologies may not work, right? So you have to think about that. So it's both management and leadership. It's not just about the head. It's not just about appealing to the logic of somebody. It's also to appealing to the emotion of those individuals. That's the hard part of it. So you may want to say, imagine if we, and especially for not-for-profits and all that, imagine if we change this, we now can impact hundreds and thousands of people, and the world might be a better place. Now, that's a very strong, powerful, emotional message that will appeal to not just the logic, but the heart of the individuals, right? And then the next one is you select a few to be the spokesperson, evangelist, but you also want the diverse many, because it's not enough if it stops only at some key individuals. And finally, people should get to the stage where it's not just that I have to change, but I want to change, right? So the combination of have to and want to. So those are sort of the things you want to think about. And Coder is pretty successful in sort of driving change across different organizations. And if you're sort of interested in this topic, I would suggest that you get deeper into it by looking at their website and so on, right? The third one is fairly simple. It's Lewin is the one that came up with this, which is basically unfreeze. So basically, whatever has been working has been in place for a long time, but now you have to sort of, it's kind of frozen, right? Everybody does it the same way and all that. So now you have to unfreeze it, because you have to change. You have recognized there's a need for change. So then you get into what needs to change, right? How do we sort of, what new behavior will replace the old one, right? And make sure that there is strong management support for that, right? And then manage and alleviate those doubts and concerns people may have. Then you come up with a change plan, right? How do you plan it? How do you implement it? And then how do you make sure that the employees are learning the new ways? And then you're going to freeze it again, because this is the new way of doing things. So now you want to freeze it, right? And changes are reinforced and stabilized, and it now becomes the new norm till you need to change again, and you come back to unfreeze. So that's essentially how Lewin works. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about McKinsey's influence model, which is the 4 building blocks. And basically what they're saying is it's a behavioral approach, right? The thing is, I will change my behavior and mindset if. So the first one is the role model. That is, if I see my leaders changing, if I see them and if they are behaving differently, I now will mimic my behavior, right? And why does it work? Because people tend to mimic individuals and groups, right? So if all I'm doing is talking, but I'm not changing, if I keep saying, hey, I think we need to take more risks and we need to experiment and all that, but every time there's an experiment failure and I just blow my top, that is not a change in my behavior. That as a leader, I'm not doing my job. So then that will never force people to change. Whereas if I say that's okay, these things happen, let's move on, let's learn from it and move on, then that's the behavior that they say, oh, okay. So, Bala, as chief technology officer, seems to be exhibiting that behavior. So I'm okay. Let's continue to do that, right? Then you want to make sure you have the fostering understanding and conviction. I know why it's being asked of me. And so that makes sense. Remember that logic, the mind and the heart. So this is appealing to that, right? And then you want to make sure there is this notion of reinforcing with formal mechanisms. What do we mean by formal mechanism? It looks like there is support in the systems. It looks like there are processes that are being modified. It looks like there is governance that folks are looking at and managing this new thing. So now I know that this is really what we want people to change. And finally, it's all about developing talent, right? Where I am able to provide new skills and opportunities for people to look at. So once again, there are commonalities across these frameworks. These are, once again, guidelines, right? So if you are embarking on a major change in the organization, I would strongly urge you to get more familiar with these frameworks. Pick one that you think is appropriate, depending on how deep you want to do it, how simple you want to keep it. Or you can just look at the influence model of McKinsey's and say, that's where I want to focus on. And so any one of those things is okay. But nevertheless, you want to make sure that there is a systematic approach to enabling change in an organization, and not something where you say, let's just do it and people will just get together. It's not going to happen, right? You want to make sure that you are addressing the fact that this is a major change in the organization, but we need to make sure that we bring everybody along with us in terms of that change. So that's essentially how you would go about doing it. And so that brings me to the conclusion. Thank you. And this is the last one. I have absolutely enjoyed teaching all of you. It's been my pleasure and privilege. And hopefully you found this useful, and hopefully you can apply some of these. And if there is ever, if you can, please shoot me an email. If you have used this, if you're going to use this in the future, I would love to hear from all of you. Good luck to each and every one of you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Professor Vala, for your very interesting presentation. I'm gonna ask to the assistants if there's any question or any I don't know, doubt regarding the analysis provided here. Bueno, vamos a tomar este tiempo para ver si es que existe alguna duda, alguna consulta. Si alguien quisiera formular alguna pregunta, es el momento para hacerlo. No hay ningún temor, no hay que tener ningún temor ni vergüenza. Esta es la instancia para hacerlo, así que yo les animo, si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, creo que por honor al tiempo, quizá con alguna nos quedaremos, así que si alguien tiene esa pregunta ahí, que no tenga miedo, que no tenga vergüenza y que lo haga directamente.
Profesor Marco, ¿puede ser una pregunta respecto a la clase pasada?
Sobre el contenido de aquí, sobre las clases, no, sobre el contenido que hemos visto aquí en
Sí.
esta presentación.
Ya no. Bueno, gracias.
Sí, no sé si alguien tiene. Rafael, adelante. Rafael, adelante.
Good evening, everyone.
Buenas, good evening.
I don't know if you can hear me well.
Yep, I can. Yep.
Okay, Professor, the question is this. How can organization decide which change management framework, such as ADKAR, Coders model, or Luis model, is most suitable for their context, considering factors like company culture, resistant to change, and resource availability?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say you sort of are headed in the right direction in terms of, what are some factors that I may look at to do that. So first of all, I would think about the magnitude of the change, right? How big are we talking about here? If it's going to be something that is going to be fairly big in scope, then I would sort of say I may need a much more formal. So quarter is probably the most exhaustive formal approach out of these four things that I talked about. So scope or magnitude of change is one factor that I may think about. The second is, as you already said, the culture of the organization, the resistance to change, the size of my organization, right? If I have only 20 people, I probably don't need all the elements of Coder to do that, right? I can get together and do that fairly easily. I may do something like Levine and go there. But if I have 25,000 people and I need them to come along with me in my change management, I may look at that Coder as that. So that could be another factor, right? And size of the organization, size and scope of the change, the culture of the organization, and how much of change has the organization already gone through. So is this is the organization getting close to change fatigue, right? And so do I need to think about, am I going back to the same set of individuals every time I have change, and are they getting tired? And so do I need to do something different from this, right? So all those are factors in which one I need to apply or take. And then, just like I said in the previous framework, you can certainly look at combining a couple of these. If you say, you know what, I need to go a little deeper in this particular area, so I'm going to use Coder. But ideally speaking, if you want to go use Coder, I would do all in. Or I may start with something like McKinsey's influence model and say, okay, these are the 4 areas I need to focus on my behavior. As well as the other things that McKinsey's influence does. And then if I still need something else, I may go down to Coder or ADKAR or something like that. But in general, Levine is the simplest. I would say Levine, McKinsey's, and are probably the simpler ones. ADKAR might be slightly more complicated, but Coder is the most exhaustive and complicated. So depending on your needs, I think that's the way I would look at it.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. I understood.
Okay.
Muchas gracias a ti, Rafael, por la pregunta. Bueno, en honor al tiempo, vamos a dar por concluida la sesión. Antes sí me gustaría dedicarle unas palabras al profesor. Professor Bala, considering that this is the last session, I would like personally, on behalf of my colleagues, to thank you for the session shared with us and for the content provided over these weeks. Thank you very much for the really valuable content discussed and for the very clear explanation. So from my side and on behalf of my colleagues, thank you very much. Thank you for all the interesting and very valuable content.
Thank you, Professor Marco. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate your interpretations and help during this. And thank you, everybody else, including all the other professors. Thank you very much.
Muy bien, con esto damos por concluida la sesión. Muchísimas gracias a todos por asistir. Así que con esto ya hemos terminado. Muchísimas gracias. Espero que el contenido, tal como dijo el profesor, sea de ayuda para vuestras clases y también para vuestro trabajo profesional. Muchas gracias por asistir y espero que se encuentren muy bien.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. We stay in touch.
Thank you very
Take care.
much.
Stay in
Nice to
touch.
meet you.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye,
Take care.
Professor.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.